So, now we come to the discussion part of the evening. So, first of all, we'll take a breather. And basically, I'm going to try and summarize, or not, perhaps summarize isn't the right word. I'm just going to pick out one or two things for each presentation that stuck out for me to give you a reminder of what the presentations were about. But then we're going to open it for discussion, comments, questions. So, please have your questions ready. So, we first heard from Greg. And one of the things that I particularly picked up on was one of the, perhaps maybe the conclusion was decisions that we make today must not endanger rights for others, with this focus on the rights. And this discussion of discount rates and how we might have a high discount rate or low discount rate may be a function of various things such as confidence in the forecast. But then there are other reasons potentially related to the precautionary principle, perhaps, where we may say actually these reasons for high discount rates may not be valid at all. And then Tom focused on insurance and their exposure to climate change, and said that insurers have this or have been assessing rather than addressing risk, and then showed examples from the Eden project how insurers might move from an assessing of risk to addressing risk, and how they may go forward in that process. Anton provided the perspective of an economist who maybe economists need psychiatry, I'm not sure. Maybe climate scientists need psychiatry. But focused on the kind of conventional methods of cost-benefit analysis and saying, well, the cost may be perhaps relatively easy to at least relatively easy to project. The benefit part under deep uncertainty, is it even possible to assess the benefit part? And it may even be impossible to construct sensible damage functions. And then finally, we heard from Martin, and looking at from a behavioral economist point of view, and looking at how, particularly for small-scale farmers, perceive probabilities of risk, and with reference to uptaking of technologies and new methods, one thing that I particularly picked up on was how uncertainty may be a reason to reject technology, and learning about how things work and playing these games and learning along the way makes influenced decisions about uptake of insurance and technologies. So now I'm going to open it up for questions, and maybe speakers just can turn around rather than come to the front. I don't know if that suits you well. So I have a microphone, so please wait for the microphone. We have a couple of microphones, so please wait for the microphone to come to you before asking a question. But any volunteers for a question to start off? There we go. I'd like to ask Greg. Can I just wait for the microphone just in case? It's just for the recording so that people can hear it when they... No? I'll be very quick.
That's quite quick.
So, Greg, how long is the future? Is there a time horizon? Because if there is no time horizon, then the future is infinite compared to the present, and we can't take any decisions.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure if you're referring to various paradoxes to do with decision theory, which take into account some
Not explicitly.
infinite horizon. It's an interesting question. I don't know. I mean, in order not to be paralyzed by this, I don't know what the solution is. Maybe the solution is to establish some kind of horizon. But it seems, I mean, I would admit, a little arbitrary to say, okay, the horizon's 50 years or 100 years. I don't know.
50 million years.
Yeah, I mean, it's
If
difficult to say
there's
anything
some
about.
time beyond which you don't care, then there's a discount.
Yes. I mean, I'm not sure what to say about some time beyond which you don't care. I mean, Keynes' view would be, as long as there are people around, you ought to care, because they're the bearers of these rights, and these rights protect their vital interests. I should say, by the way, as an aside, that Keynes doesn't say that he is only interested in advocating a zero discount rate only insofar as it protects human beings. He leaves open the notions that we might also want to protect non-human animals and indeed the environment, entirely non-sentient entities as well. Yeah, but yeah, as long as there might be people, it's not a time that you don't care about. That would be his view.
would that be beyond the likely age of the universe?
I think it would be remarkable if I were to provide some kind of answer to that. I have absolutely no idea. I mean, that sounds like the answer is no. But, I mean, again, what's the import of the question?
The import is that it seems to me obvious that, in fact, there is a time horizon, and if there is a time horizon, then there is a discount.
Yeah. Well, look, if the time horizon is very far in the distance, then for all practical purposes, Caney is still saying things which have profound consequences for actual climate policies, because climate policies would be very different depending on whether you care about what happens in 100 years' time or you don't.
No, I agree about 100 years. I'm not so sure about 100 million years.
Yeah, yeah. No, nobody is, I guess.
But if you cared about 100 million years, then the fact of 100 million years completely outweighs 100 years. And your caring about the 100 million years would completely determine what you did now.
Yeah.
You don't need a smooth discount. If you have zero, you could go to infinity. So we don't assume that the discount rate is constant. So I think that gets you out of that.
At what time?
Well, that's a decision that's that's a decision that is made collectively or by in some way or through some mechanism. But I think you can have. Yeah, I think the main answer is you can have different discount rates at different times. And but maybe the economists can get me out of my pickle here.
Maybe that's why we can't do anything.
The notion of a step discount rate is very important. But it would be interesting if we did a whip around the room and offered everyone 100 Rand today, or 100 Rand in a year's time. Who would take the 100 Rand in a year's time?
So but we all believe in inflation.
Right.
If we believed in deflation,
if we knew the inflation, we pegged it at inflation, right? So if,
no, but what if the
we offered you
inflation rate
106
was
Rand,
no, but if the inflation rate was minus 20, 100 Rand in a year's
Sure.
time is very valuable.
sure. But so I think my question to Greg, which I think is the question, is some things you might like money, you might want to discount, and some things you might not want to discount. Isn't that the point?
Yeah.
Money is not a white or. Is that the distinction that you're making?
Well, the money case seems to me complicated because of inflation or deflation.
No. Let's take inflation or
that
deflation
aside.
out of it. Let's take the time value of money.
You know, again, I think Caney's view would be much more radical than it is if he were to claim that in every single case the discount needs to be zero. He's talking about cases in which we have reason to believe that vital human interests are threatened. Yeah. And I guess if money is somehow involved inextricably in such a case in a particular circumstance, then he wants again the discount rate to be zero. If not, he's got nothing to say about that.
Okay, so do we have any questions that are related to that theme, or? Yeah.
Let me just grab this one here. Sure. My question is, I think, relevant because it touches on a lot of the different things that I've said with a specific example. I work at the Energy Research Center, and we are involved in a project called the Mitigation Action Plans and Scenarios, where a number of South American countries are doing a similar thing to what Anton did, but with a focus on mitigation. So trying to plot scenarios for what these countries should be doing, and in effect, then it's a cost-benefit analysis. You have to say we have limited resources, we've got to put it towards something. The costs are incurred now, benefits accrue at different points, or occur at different points in the future. So the debate is very explicitly what discount rate should we apply. So my original question was going to be, should we not apply some sort of non-constant, possibly declining discount rate? And I think the reason there is it does deal with the distribution in terms of more utility than some of the other distributional aspects that you were talking about. But you know, that was Stern's approach focused on distribution, but he adopted a very small pure rate of time preference, whereas critics such as Nordhaus said that it should be higher based on largely the opportunity cost of money. So then when it does come down to money, in the short term, you do need to consider a discount rate, because when you, as a policymaker, are facing a whole lot of conflicting options that you need to choose what the best is in terms of development or welfare of your population as a whole, it makes sense that you need to consider the opportunity cost, what you could spend it on. But as you move further and further down the line, you then need to have a lower discount rate. So, you know, for me, it seems to make, from a very pragmatic point of view, it makes sense to say that you have a closer to market discount rate in the short term that decreases over time. So long term, you're dealing with the sort of ethical issues. Short term, you're dealing with the practical money, opportunity cost of money issues. From your perspective, in a sort of philosophy context, what do you think of that sort of declining discount rate over time approach?
No, I mean, I think that's an interesting point and one to think about. I mean, the general point, of course, is that insofar as you're interested in human rights, it might not be the case that the best way to protect them in the long term is simply directly to work for the protection of those rights. Maybe, for instance, you want to help people to become more affluent so that they don't behave in ways which work against the environment. But I mean, I do think that that's potentially plausible. It's something to think about, yeah.
It is on. I've got a question for the other three. Each of you in turn have told us about the positive features of your investigations. And speaking as a member of the audience, I thought, oh yeah, that's good. But what I really wanted to know is, what did your clients think? What did your clients think of your conclusions?
Well, we didn't have any clients. It was a collaboration, partnership. So that's quite important, because we went in there at the beginning and very clear that it was the insurance industry. But we worked with them. We brought our own money. It's very tough for the insurance industry. You know, they've had their whole approach to managing risk framed by this approach to assessing and excluding risk. And it's really defined everything they do. And although they see the threat of climate change and they are aware of it and they're motivated to find a solution to it, at the moment, they can't see the pathways that they have to actually realize that change. And that is the big challenge which, as an industry, they're going to have to face. Santam, who we're working for, is taking it up, and they are seriously discussing it internally about what options they have. But yes, I mean, it's one thing talking about it from an academic perspective here. It's another thing from a normative perspective of how they actually go about doing it. But there is this discussion. And just to add to that, the company last year that got awarded the greenest company in the world by I think it was Newsweek, was in fact an insurance company, Munich Re, for the work that they're doing around trying to change the directions of economies towards green growth.
So our client was Dr. Deborah Roberts, who some of you will know. She was, I think she appreciated the work. She was upset that, because it's a particular bent, that the ecosystem-based adaptation options didn't emerge more favorably from our cost-benefit study. The reason for that, I think, is very interesting, is that those ecosystem-based, because there's a lot of literature which says that your ecosystem-based climate change adaptation options are your most cost-effective. Most of that literature emerges from a rural context. Ours was an urban context, in which the price of land, the opportunity cost of land, is really high. And the density of people is also really high. So socio-institutional interventions tend to have greater bang for buck, because you can reach a lot of people quite quickly. Environmentally based options don't have great bang for buck, because you need land for most of them. Yeah? And in the urban context, that land is expensive. So she was a little upset about that. Most of the people we worked with, including the politicians, were delighted to have a people-based approach to making the prioritization. The hardest client or portion of our client to convince, I guess, is the finance department, which is where the rubber hits the road. But actually, there's not much evidence to show that cost-benefit analysis has any traction in policy formulation in South Africa, or in budget allocation anyway. So suggest that there were links beforehand. No, I mean, I don't mean that facetiously at all. Not only in South Africa, anyway. In fact, the feed-through from cost-benefit approaches to policy formulation are really quite tenuous. And so I'm not sure we should be looking for huge impact there. So our client was not particularly, it wasn't an insurance industry. We weren't challenging any massively vested interest. And so it was reasonably well received. Yeah, thanks.
With the small-scale farmers we worked with, it's interesting to think about who is really the client. Is it them? Is it the international reviewers for high-ranking journals, or is it the policymakers or even NGOs that we want to speak to? The work that we did here is still in progress. We haven't finalized writing it up, so we haven't really formally fed back to the communities. But in the case where we actually went into the communities and did the field experiments, with these guys, as with all the other experiments that we've done, we've had extremely positive feedback, or interactions with people in the communities. People respond very positively because they feel it's a learning exercise, and it's also been shown that through doing public goods games or risk games, people learn an enormous amount about the process, and it helps them in their everyday decision making, often more so than a training workshop might do. But also they earn real money, often more than a day's wage, so it's very popular from that perspective. But an interesting point was, for instance, some of the NGOs who works with small-scale farmers that we've approached have been against us working with the farmers because they feel that this is too abstract and it doesn't directly contribute to them gaining knowledge. And that makes it quite difficult, because from our perspective there's a lot of I think one always have to ask with these kind of lab experiments and field experiments, to what extent is there external validity and is it applicable to real life situations. But I think where one can sort of use it as a sort of a learning tool and then give positive feedback afterwards, it can be extremely useful. Thanks.
Okay, do we have any other questions?
My question is to Anton. Just with the ecosystem-based adaptations, what was the value placed on ecosystem services or biodiversity? It's just out of interest, because if we had to look in the future, that I feel placing a value on biodiversity, for example, is almost as difficult as understanding what the best discount rate is, because we don't know what the value will be of the ecosystem or what that will be in the future. And I just wanted to see what the pros, if there was a challenge or.
Yeah, that was central to the challenge, and what we did was arguably anthropocentric, which is problematic in some ways. But remember, what we did is we didn't try and value the environment or environmental damage. We take one of the options involved a coastal protection zone, for example, right, as a sea level rise mitigation adaptation option. We counted the number of people that would be positively influenced by a coastal protection zone, including commuters, people who live there, people who drew resources from there, and the extent to which they were positively influenced. Remember, did they have their lives saved by this coastal protection zone? Their lives massively improved, moderately improved, not affected at all. So we didn't. Your issue is vexing, and we deliberately avoided it. And arguably, we fell into the trap of being anthropocentric. So we deliberately did not try and value intrinsic environmental value, for example. That was in our inception report. We said we're not going to try and do that, right? Which is arguably a flaw, but we stayed clear of that, and we counted people, and that's how we did it.
So that raises a difficult question, because even if you don't value the environment, the ecosystem services do affect the people you're talking about in one sense, and the other is around how then what's actually quite a narrow sectoral approach to an investment. You're almost doing the same as the economists do, in the sense that you're looking within a small part of the system and ignoring all the externalities, positive or negative, that come to that particular intervention. Yeah.
So we are economists, right? But no, we value the environment for the benefit which it imparted on people. That's the anthropocentricity of it. So we didn't not value the environment. We valued it for its value. Now we acknowledge that that's a limited approach. But key to that is, and I think this was one of the sort of things we had to try and translate, that GDP is just a proxy for well-being. Yeah? And arguably a very poor proxy in that particular context. Right? And we just used a different proxy to construct our cost-benefit analysis. So, and we did value, and our proxy was counting people, and admittedly a very subjective notion of, you know, how their livelihoods were improved. But we feel it gave us a better number than some sort of saved GDP number. And we did value the environment, but for its positive impact on livelihoods, and the number of people on which it positively impacted, and the extent to which it positively impacted. So we did not value the environment, we just valued it differently.
While we're on the subject of your study, can you just quickly indicate that cost-benefit graph you showed? Was that for one particular point on the one particular choice of the 4? And also, what range of climate change options did you consider?
So I should have said that, right? That what I showed you there was one of 12 outcomes. It was for a particular quadrant, a particular scenario, and a particular time frame. You probably saw it had I think, I forget, was it ready for the storm 50 years or something like that. So ready for storm is one of those quadrants. And it's a 50-year time frame. Which is the second half of your question? So
and which climate change options we use?
So on the horizontal axis of our 4 scenarios was the extent of climate change impact, and we were forced to put some data into that. So on the extreme left is sort of 1 to 1.5 degrees of warming, and on the extreme right of that we said was roughly 6 degrees of warming. That was our extreme. But we deliberately didn't make a big deal of that. It's just, you know, worse than expected, better than expected, actually. And we think that that's at least as robust, actually.
Thanks.
Sorry, I should have added that, Mark, the co-benefits that you used, the externalities, right? We try to feed in the multi-criteria assessment. So there were issues like maladaptation, unforeseen consequences, job creation, technical, you know, so it's impossible to do full justice to the externalities. That's why they're usually external. But we tried to factor them into the intrinsic merit of each of the 16 municipal adaptation clusters.
I've got a question for Tom. The insurance industry is inherently competitive, but addressing climate change is an area in which their collaboration can be beneficial. So do you have a sense of the collaboration between insurance companies and even underwriters with regard to addressing climate change?
Yeah, I mean, the problem for underwriters is that underwriters, their role has always been to assess risk. They use actuarial data and they factor in the climate models and other factors, and they produce a price for risk. And by definition, their job is not to engage in managing it. So at the beginning, there's not really a home in the insurance industry, most insurance companies yet, where a response like this can emerge and be fostered. The other problem is a question of scale. Like, most insurers are working on fairly local levels, and the risks that they're being exposed to are also on local levels. But often, a lot of the drivers of those risks can come from regulation that's at the national level. And so there's a bit of a divide there. So a lot of what's happening, particularly in Europe, there's a lot of where the industry associations are taking up the reins with a lot of this collaboration, because that helps to overcome the challenge of free riding, which is a big fear. You know, if one insurance company goes in there and helps reduce risk for a community, you're helping all the other insurance companies which are exposed there, and that's one of the big fears of most insurers. So that's why a lot of insurance associations are getting involved, and particularly the sort of Munich Re's, the big reinsurance companies, the companies which insure insurance companies, they're getting very involved at the global level in terms of how do we start to address the problems of climate change.
Okay, do we have any other questions, comments? if I may offer. So I did some work with the insurance industry as well in my PhD, and I think that from my perspective, I was working with Lloyd's of London, and they have a role to facilitate the insurance market, and the action on climate change very much seemed to be at the kind of CEO board level, which was, it's nice to see that it was being taken at that strategic level, but it's also quite frustrating that they weren't, it wasn't spilling down into the underwriting level, and that's really where the competitiveness comes. And I think at this kind of strategic level, they're quite happy to work with each other. And I know across the road in the Willis Re building, they were very aware of the work going on there, and they were quite kind of happy for them to be, you know, researching and forming collaborations with institutes, and didn't feel threatened at all that was taking place. But it still doesn't seem, at least in my perspective, that it's really filtering down as an issue to the underwriting level purely because of this 1 year time horizon. So it's really only at the strategic level where it's being considered. And I have a question related. So I just spent 2 days at a complexity forum where, so it's kind of in relation to kind of ACDI and the fostering interdisciplinarity. Some of the perspectives you showed may be kind of have a focus in certain disciplinary ways of considering risk. And I wonder if any of you want to comment on the challenges of trying to break out of the way certain disciplines see and treat climate risk in particular. So I wondered if you can, given the forum that we're in, to maybe comment on the challenges moving to a kind of interdisciplinary way of assessing risk. And I'm saying this as a kind of climate scientist trying to engage with economists and such like. So does anyone want to comment on that?
Well, I should mention that within the ACDI there is currently an interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary initiative where a number of us from different different disciplines are trying to work together on a project dealing with climate change in the Berg River area. Mark can also tell you more about that, but I mean that's a very interesting initiative, trying to overcome some of those obstacles and learning to talk to each other in the different disciplines. In my own view, though, with regards to your comment, I think that often there's more internal dialogue and criticism within disciplines that one realizes. So economics is often sort of shot down for certain pitfalls, etc., that it has, that Anton, for instance, highlighted earlier. But that debate is well and alive within economics, and there's also different streams in economics, as we pointed out, that tries to address that. So yeah, I think it's really a question of just sort of opening that dialogue between different disciplines so that we can learn more about what each other does, and sort of that helps, that we actually use the work and the knowledge that we build in different disciplines to enrich our own disciplines.
Well, I'm based at the Center of Criminology, and I'm studying climate change in the economics of insurance, so I guess that's fairly interdisciplinary in its own right. But I think for us, one of the core features of the success of the Eden study was the fact that it was interdisciplinary, that it brought together the climate modelers that we worked with alongside the social scientists that started to try and understand how insurance companies were interpreting the use of climate models and things like that. So for us, it was a crucial feature, and it continues to be.
The power of an well-refined disciplinary idea that isn't interdisciplinary, right? That some of this interdisciplinary stuff, let's be honest with with ourselves, a lot of it is important, but some of it is a fudge and a sort of dumbing down, right? And I took this from Greg's deeply sort of, well, for me anyway, deeply philosophical approach, and just the value of that in this complex environment. And I think economics, again, for me, I've come full circle. The challenge is to draw on actually quite simple and elegant economic ideas to speak, and economics ideas, so not what I was presenting tonight, but to speak sort of powerfully into complex situations, and we shouldn't underestimate that whilst embracing interdisciplinary in other contexts.
Thanks. Firstly, let me just remember to say to Anton, sorry, he was Sir Nicholas Stern, but I think he's become a lord since then. So I corrected you, and I think I was wrong. Anyway, I want to add a point to Anton's one, which is that it may be a bad idea to try to learn about what one discipline says by reading the work of people in another. One tends to take certain things on trust, particularly when you're reading people who are prominent in your own discipline, but they can easily get things wrong about other disciplines. So I was reading, for instance, and somebody in the audience referred to them, the work of William Nordhaus and Partha Dasgupta in response to the Stern report. And both of them made remarks about ethics. Now, these are superb economists, of course, and deserve tremendous respect, but these remarks about ethics were such that they would have been howlers in a first-year ethics course. They were kind of confused, and they got things mixed up. And I feel absolutely certain that when philosophers in turn talk about economics or EGS or other areas, they make similar howlers. So I guess my idea is, if one is interested in understanding various disciplines, it's good to go to the horse's mouth rather than simply to take on trust what the discipline is through the voice of somebody from another.
Any other comments and questions?
Thanks. I just want to comment on the interdisciplinary thing, because I've also come full circle, and I think the full circle thing is part of the value of interdisciplinariness. I think you need to start off grounded, so that you have a solid set of principles to have those complex, elegant arguments that you can follow through. You do need to understand what other people are saying, because then you can understand where you're doing something that's short-sighted or narrow-minded. And that's where the value of interdisciplinary comes in, is that you're not screwing somebody else over because of your limited understanding. And then the last thing, which I now forgot. Yeah, so you come full circle, you come back to your own disciplinary, and just the mere interaction that you have with somebody else can give you more knowledge about your own industry, because you can only truly understand your own thing if you can explain it adequately to somebody from somewhere else. So I think that's where the balance lies.
Okay, perhaps time for one last question or comment. Anyone keen to raise their hand? There we go.
Bit more light-hearted. I'm doing a piece on discount rates, and I'd love to have you have a look at it and tell me whether my ethical comments are appropriate or not.